Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I am very pleased to bring you Beat Not the Bones by Charlotte J. This is copyright 1952 by Harper & Row, and as you can see, it is a Harper novel of suspense. Very interesting fact about this book, it is the first ever book to be awarded the Edgar for Best Mystery of the Year. So, there are a lot of different Edgars out there, but when people talk about the Edgar with that, definite article, they're talking about the Grand Poobah, the best book of the year. And the inaugural book in the Edgar Awards, once again, Beat Not the Bones by Charlotte J. So I am an enormous fan of Charlotte J. She wrote some really top-notch 5-star suspense books. And I have to recommend all of them to you. And usually I do that at the end of the video, but just in case you get bored with my yammering, I want to show you some of them up front and describe them, because I really don't want you leaving this video without committing to reading a book by Charlotte J. So a 5-star book is this one, The Fugitive Eye. Really a brilliant book about a man who finds himself temporarily blinded and in danger and has to get himself out of danger without sight. Just a superior book, so suspenseful, such a great concept, so well executed. Loved it. Another, this one right here, The Stepfather. And, this person is looking rather forbidding. Quite a scary and pulse-pounding novel of suspense that you really can't put down. And what is maybe my favorite, but it's very hard to say any of these books is better than any of the others, is this one here called A Hank of Hair, billed as a novel of nightmare, and that's exactly what it is. Really excruciating suspense, bordering on horror. Quite a short book, but packs a punch, and I think could really be considered required reading for anybody who is into this kind of nightmarish suspense quality in books. So Charlotte J. definitely knew what she was doing and received a lot of acclaim in her time, justly so. I felt very, very pleased to discover her. I can't remember how, but I'm glad that I did. So now that I have discovered her and read most of her books, I can classify them into 2 categories. The first would be the types of books that I just showed you, which are traditional mystery / suspense plots. I don't want to call them traditional because they're not about, English country house murders, but they fit more, carefully into that genre that we think of as sort of suspense or thriller. Maybe not mystery so much, but definitely suspense thriller. Very, very Hitchcockian in a way. And then her other books are, and these suspense books all take place close to home, England. The other set of books, of which Beat Not the Bones is one, are set in the tropical islands of Oceania. And part of that is due to Charlotte J's background. Her real name was Geraldine Page. She wrote under the pseudonym Charlotte J. And was born in Australia, but spent a lot of time in the islands in that region. Moved to England at one point. Spent quite a good amount of time in Papua New Guinea, which is the setting for this book. So her second category of books are set in these very lush, densely tropical islands, or exotic locales. Like there's another one, Arms for Adonis, The Voice of the Crab. Those are set in these exotic locales. And the main difference between the two types of books would be that the former are just kind of grab you by the throat suspense, and the latter are more, they move a little bit more slowly, and they're very, very descriptive, and they're kind of a slower burn, with a plot that's not as driving, but is still very much part of the book. So you're reading for story as much as for location and exoticism. So let's get a little bit into Beat Not the Bones. It was Charlotte Jay's first book, and let me give you a sort of a quick plot summary. So it starts out with a man, kind of a fortune hunter is not the right word. He's a little bit of a dirtbag. He's just looking to make a quick buck in the easiest way possible. He has stumbled upon a native group in Papua New Guinea, and has basically taken their gold trinkets and their gold artworks from them. And he's going to the Ministry of Culture to try to get them to approve him taking away all of the gold objects from this native or indigenous group of people. And, the people in the government office say, you cannot do that. We're trying to establish good relationships with the indigenous people of this island, and, going and stealing their precious objects, which, may have religious significance, is not something we can allow you to do. And so the man who makes that, decides that, his name is David Warwick. And so all of this happens in the first chapter. In the second chapter, David Warwick has died by suicide, and his young and naive wife, who is back in Australia, has decided to come to the island and try to figure out what happened to her husband. And while there, she is thrown into the culture shock of being on an island with indigenous people that we know very little about. And this strong sense of, not a clash of the cultures, but these enormous differences between, people who live in sort of an Anglo-based society in Australia, having basically nothing in common with the indigenous people of the islands that they have, conquered or colonized. And that really plays a very strong role in the book. In fact, you read this book as much for its anthropological or geographic insights as you do for the mystery. Because, nobody's a fan of colonialism, but this book really shows the legacy of the colonial era. And it can be a little bit hard to take in that, it's basically the white man's burden. That's how the Australian characters feel, that they are on this island to teach the indigenous people how to live. The Australians, which they call the white men, are completely in over their heads. They don't know how to live in this tropical their treatment of the indigenous people is awful, and heartbreaking in a way, but only one of the characters really sees that. The rest of them are so misguided as to think that, they can have a civilizing influence on these people who live there, for millennia, very happily, having, evolved the way of life that works for them in their space, their place. And you watch the white men in this book treating indigenous people horribly, treating them like slaves, beating them, really looking on them as almost not fully human. In fact, there's a line in here that I'll never forget where the heroine, Emma Warwick, the narrator says about her, she had not been on the island long enough to learn how to treat the native people as subhuman. So clearly, Charlotte J. was very, very sympathetic to the people of these islands and the way they are kind of just brutalized by the white man's society. And so in a way, you've got a real Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness kind of feeling going on here. And if you're sensitive, it can be kind of hard to take. Maybe another good comparison is Uncle Tom's Cabin, an important part of history, but that doesn't mean that it's a fun, easy, or comfortable read. And I think part of what Charlotte J. did here is just sort of important from a societal or anthropological or geographical viewpoint. She saw what was being done here, and she was on the side of the native people. Again, be aware that you're going to hear language in here that is going to make you uncomfortable. These people being called savages and primitive, but it's done for a purpose, right? It's very literary in that way. Each time you see those words, you wince and you're there with the author in terms of her belief system. And she doesn't tell you, she shows you, which is, one of the rules of writing a good novel is to show and not to tell. So Emma Warwick, the widow of this man who has died by suicide, shows up on the island, and she is hell-bent on finding out what happened to him. And the colonial authorities appear to be helping her, but she senses that they're really not, that they're trying to misdirect her. And she finally says, look, I'm going into a part of the island that is not part of what they call the patrolled territory. So they haven't quite subjugated the indigenous people of this area yet, to find out what happened to her husband. And so, a couple of the guys, some of whom are very, very unpleasant, including one who is, you'd never really quite know what to make of him. His name is Philip Washington, and he's the white man who understands the best that this attempt to fuse, say, the white man's culture with indigenous culture is really bound for a horrible failure. But at the same time, he's so sort of nasty and dismissive and treats people so badly that it's really hard to like him, even though he is on the right side of history. And I'd say that probably, as much as I'm kind of gushing about the book, the problem, or one of the things that I liked a little less about this book, is that the characters, you can't really find a character to like here so much. They're kind of nasty, small-minded. They have blinders on. Even Emma, the ingenue who comes to find what led to the death of her husband, she's kind of annoying. She's one of these sort of whiny, weepy heroines who doesn't feel like she has much backbone. She develops backbone as the novel proceeds. So you can say maybe it's a little bit of a Bildungsroman in that way. But she can be kind of annoying and smackable, as one of the reviews that I read said about her. But the story is so interesting that, and she's going to get to the bottom of it, and she does get to the bottom of it, and when she does, it's hard to take the what has happened. So I don't want to give you any more detail than that, but you can think of the book as Emma's journey towards finding the truth of what led to the death of her husband. On a personal note, I was kind of happy to see that I've recently been editing an art history book, and there are a few chapters in there on the art of Oceania, and I saw everything that not everything, but a lot of the stuff that I'd learned from working on that book, I saw at work in this book, published, 60, 70 years ago now. I saw this dovetailing of explanations of indigenous arts and their meaning. And so I felt like I brought a little bit more art historical knowledge to the book. And it's always nice when you can edit a book that has so much of an influence on your life that you take it with you as you move forward. I would say that unlike the books that I talked about at the start of this video, the tropical books are slower paced. So you read them and you marvel at the description and the sense of place. And the story is always there, and you're always wanting to know what happened, but the pace is more leisurely. Like, I didn't want to race through 100 pages of this book at a time. Like, maybe 50 a night was enough for me. So if you're really into that, TikTok clock counting down type suspense, go with the books that I discussed and recommended at the beginning of this book. If you want something that's more of a slow burn with a larger theme, then I think Beat Not the Bones will be a great way for you to start with Charlotte J, because it got her career off to a great start, and she really did some amazing work thereafter. You may be asking, what does the title mean, Beat Not the Bones? So the best description I can give about that is, some of you may have read a book by Arthur Upfield called, what was the name of it now? The Bone is Pointed. The Bone is Pointed. And it takes place in Australia, and the lead character, his name is Napoleon Bonaparte. They call him Boney, and he is First Nations Australian, formerly known as Aboriginal, but now known as First Nations Australian. And the book is really about sort of animism and shamanism, and it's all about these, I guess we would back in the day have called them sort of witch doctors, and the enormous power that they have over indigenous populations, not because they have true powers of good or evil, but because people believe in it, right? So in that book, The Bone is Pointed, it means if a shaman points a bone at you and wills your death, you are likely to die because you believe so much in these spirits that the shaman has invoked that you will die. And there's something similar going on here, hence the term beating out the bones. The native belief is known in the book as Puri Puri, Purri, which is an animistic religion that, I guess some people would compare to voodoo, or what people traditionally or stereotypically think about voodoo. Because a large part of the suspense in this book comes from the fear of these indigenous people who are living beyond the purview of the white people, and they're known as Vada men, V-A-D-A men, and they are these powerful religious figures who create totems and other things that are believed to have these powers. And everybody lives in fear of them, even the white man. And so the book is also very psychological about the power of the brain to make you believe things that really don't have any logical basis, but that are so much a part of society, that like I said, you could point a bone at someone and cause them to die or lose weight or have terrible things happen to them. So that's an interesting part of this book too, if you like a little bit of that aspect of very I keep using the word animistic religions, where that are thousands of years old, much older than any of the major religious traditions today. In a way, the setup with the Puri Puri and the white person affected by them reminded me of one of my very favorite books, The Devil's Own by Peter Curtis, in which an English missionary who goes to Africa experiences some of the animistic religion there and is traumatized by it, and then has to come home and finds herself in a village where there are some very spooky goings on. And I'm happy to tell you that The Devil's Own by Peter Curtis, a Crime Club book, was actually written by the fabulous, amazing, incomparable Nora Lofts. And when word of that got out, it was republished as The Little Wax Doll, A Tale of Modern Witchcraft. It's the first Nora Lofts book I ever read, and it made me a fan of hers for life. You'll see here it's called A Tale of Modern Witchcraft. And I think some people today would take exception to the use of the word witches, because we now have a wider understanding of witches and Wiccanism and that kind of stuff. So, I always say on this channel, we can't fall into presentism. We can't judge books published 70 years ago by today's standards. We have to understand that there's going to be language and concepts that we're not always comfortable with. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't read the books. So I see that I've gone on for a long time, but I'm not going to apologize, because I really want you to go out and find one of these books by Charlotte J. And, right here, leave me a note thanking me. I'm so pleased to be able to bring Charlotte J to you, because I know very few people who know about her casually. Last thing I'll say is, I mentioned before that Emma, the heroine, is a little bit of a whiny, weepy, annoying character sometimes. And I found that odd, because Charlotte J clearly was a sophisticated woman. And it struck me as odd that she would choose to have such a mushy heroine. Like, in comparison, Dorothy B. Hughes, who wrote around the same time, her female characters had more depth, more strength. But again, like I said, it may be that what Charlotte J. was doing was, plotting a character arc to make Emma become stronger as a result of her adventure in Papua New Guinea and what she learns and, how it ultimately affects her life. Oh, I should also mention that I believe Dorothy B. Hughes gave a very, very positive review to this book, and you can kind of understand why the two women were writing, in the same vein, although in very different locations. So if you've got any questions or would like my gentle opinions on anything having to do with Charlotte J., feel free to leave me a comment below. I will be happy to respond. And like I said, I will be back next time with another book. But in the meantime, run out and find yourself something by Charlotte J. A Hank of Hair. That's my recommendation for book number 1, although The Stepfather and The Fugitive Eye are equally fabulous. Okay, thank you and good night.